The barn went up wrong. Too fast. Too deliberate. Like the fire had been given instructions and a head start. He dragged the one horse he could save through the side door, while the roof began to surrender beam by beam. Smoke took the shape of every name he had tried to bury under 9 years of hammer strikes. She did not run. She stood at his shoulder and looked past the burning wood to the dark line of the eastern road. When she said the name, it landed like the second shot no one had heard yet. The street filled with men who had come to watch, not to fight the fire, not to ask questions, just to see what the message looked like when it finished burning. His hands shook once on the reins, then steadied. The mare turned north as if the night had already chosen its direction. He swung up anyway. The forge never slept, neither did Wade Callum. He was at the anvil before the sun had any opinion about the day. Before the roosters. Before the saloon sweepers dragged last night's bad decisions out onto the street. The hammer came down again, steady. As a man who had learned that rhythm was the only prayer that actually worked. Ashbone Creek, New Mexico Territory. Summer of 1874. The town smelled like dust and cattle and something faintly rotten underneath both of those things. It always had. Wade had stopped noticing years ago. You stop noticing the smell of a place, the same sound off noticing the weight of a guilt. It doesn't go away. You just build muscle around it until you can carry it, without showing. He was broad through the shoulders, hands like geography, scarred, mapped by decades of iron and heat. A burn scar ran from his collar up the right side of his neck, curling toward his jaw. People glanced at it, nobody asked. In Ashbone Creek, you learned fast that the questions people didn't ask were the ones that mattered most. 58 years old, no wife, no children that he knew of. One horse, one forge. One cot in the back room that he rarely used before midnight because sleep and Wade Callum had a complicated arrangement. He hammered, the iron bent, became something. Outside, in the thin gray light before dawn, men were dragging lumber across the square, building something too. He didn't go to watch. He'd seen auction platforms go up before. Ashbone Creek hosted one every 6 weeks or so. Cattle, mostly. Equipment. Occasionally something that made your stomach move in a direction it wasn't meant to go. Wade had learned to keep his eyes toward the forge on those days. Keep his hands busy. Keep the hammer moving, except he needed new iron stock, and the supply wagon had come in yesterday and parked right next to that lumber, which meant he had to go into the square, which meant he had to walk past the platform, which meant today was going to be one of those days. He set the hammer down, wiped his hands on the leather apron, walked out into the morning like a man walking into shallow water, careful, testing each step, ready to turn back. The square was already crowded for that hour. Men standing in clusters, talking low. The particular kind of low that meant something was being sold that people weren't entirely comfortable admitting they were there to buy. Wade knew that register of voice. He'd heard it before. In other towns, in other years. In a version of himself he had spent a long time trying to outpace. He kept his head down, found the supply wagon, checked the iron stock, negotiated a price with the driver without making eye contact, with anything happening 20 yards to his left. He was almost done, almost. Then the auctioneer's voice cut through the morning air like a thing that had been sharpened specifically to cut through attempts at dignity. Next lot. Apache female, young, healthy, good teeth. If she'll let you check, laughter. The particular kind of sounds like barking. Wade didn't turn around. He would not turn around. He was turning around. She was standing on the platform like she owned it. That was the first thing. The way she stood. Not the posture of someone defeated. Not the posture of someone waiting for the next bad thing. Something else. Something that took him a moment to name. She was cataloging. Her eyes moved across the crowd with the calm, systematic precision of someone making a list. This face. That exit, that man's gun hand. That man's weak left knee. She was gathering information, the way a tracker, gathers information, not frantically, not desperately, methodically. Like she had time. Like she intended to use everything she was learning. Her wrists were bound with rope. Thick. Too tight. Wade could see the skin already angry at the edges. A cut at the left corner of her mouth, half healed. 3 days old, maybe 4. She'd been in someone's keeping before this. Before here. She was young, 20-something. Hard to say more than that. Her face was still. When the auctioneer grabbed her chin to tilt her face toward the crowd, she didn't fight him. She didn't flinch. She turned her head. Just that. A slow, precise refusal. The kind that costs nothing and says everything. The auctioneer grabbed again. She turned her head again. The crowd thought this was entertainment. Men were grinning. One man near the front said something that made the men around him laugh in that ugly, braying way. She didn't look at him. She looked past him. At something on the far edge of the crowd. At something only she could see. Wade stood with his iron stock tucked under one arm and thought, I should go. I have work. I have absolutely nothing to offer this situation. I am one man with $2 and a bad shoulder and a past that disqualifies me from the hero position entirely. He stood there and then. From behind him, from somewhere in the knot of men near the town council steps, he heard a voice low, warm, carrying that particular quality of effortless authority that some men spend their whole lives trying and never quite achieve. A voice he recognized before he consciously registered it. A voice he'd spent 12 years trying to forget the sound of General Elias Croft. Wade's body knew before his mind did. His hands went cold. The iron stock suddenly weighed twice what it had. His heart something technical and unpleasant behind his ribs. He turned. Croft was standing near the town council steps. 64 years old, but carrying it like a man who had negotiated with time and gotten favorable terms. Silver-haired, immaculate coat, despite the dust that touched everything else in Ashbone Creek. Talking to the deputy territorial commissioner the way a man talks to someone he owns a portion of. Pleasant, relaxed. Making the other man feel included in a joke at his own expense. Croft hadn't seen Wade. The crowd was between them. Wade was in work clothes. Soot-marked, hat pulled low. Nothing remarkable to look at. Nothing that would catch a general's eye. Croft glanced at the platform. Nodded once, with satisfaction. The satisfaction of a man looking at inventory. And Wade looked at the woman on the platform. She was still doing her cataloging. Still methodical. Still precise. And then her eyes landed on Wade. And for 1/2 second, just one, she looked at him the way you look at something that might or might not be what you think it is, then she looked away. Back to her list. Wade's hand went up. He didn't plan it. He genuinely did not plan it. His hand simply went up the way a man's hand goes to a wound before he's consciously registered the pain. $2. The square went quiet. Not silent. Quiet. The particular quiet of a large group of people recalibrating their understanding of what was happening. $2. For comparison, a decent pair of boots cost $2. One night's serious drinking at the Ashbone Creek Saloon cost $2. A $2 bid at a human auction was not a bid, it was a statement. And the statement was either profound or deranged, and the crowd hadn't decided which yet. The auctioneer looked around, trying to find the bidder. Do I hear who said? $2, Wade said again. Flat. Clear. From the edge of the crowd, people turned. Looked at him. A blacksmith. Nobody remarkable. A soot-marked man, with iron stock under his arm who had apparently lost his mind before breakfast. Nobody countered. Croft was still talking to the commissioner. He heard the stir. Turned to look. Scanned the crowd. Didn't find the bidder. Wade was already stepping back. Angling behind the supply wagon, the auctioneer shrugged. This job had taught him that the world was strange and that his responsibility ended at the transaction sold. $2. Wade set the iron stock back on the wagon. He'd come back for it later. He walked to the platform steps, reached into his coat. laid 2 silver coins on the table beside the auctioneer's ledger. They made a sound that was too small for what they were supposed to represent. A thin, ringing sound against the wood, like an apology that knew it wasn't enough. He took out his knife, cut the rope at her wrists. The rope fell. She didn't move immediately. She looked at her wrists, looked at the marks the rope had left, matter of fact. The way you look at damage to assess it, not to feel it. Then she looked at him direct, unblinking, as though she was adding him to the list she'd been building from the platform. "You will regret this," she said. Her English was precise, careful. Each word placed exactly where she intended it. "I will not obey you." Wade looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his hat, which had come slightly askew, and settled it back on his head. "Good," he said. "I wasn't buying obedience." He turned and walked back toward the forge. He heard after a moment the sound of footsteps behind him. Not following, not exactly, moving parallel, maintaining distance. The way a person moves when they have decided that 2 points are heading in the same direction but haven't decided yet whether that means they're traveling together. He didn't look back. She would make her own decision about what this was. That was correct. That was how it should be. Croft's men were still watching the main road. That was why she came toward the forge, rather than the road. Wade understood this without her explaining it, and she understood that he understood it, which meant they were already communicating in the particular efficient language of people who don't have time for unnecessary conversations. She sat outside the forge door. He left a blanket there, water, dried meat wrapped in cloth, set them down without comment and went inside. The fire was still going, banked, not dead. He built it back up, took the pieces of iron he'd been working before dawn and started again. The hammer came down, and down, outside, he could hear her. Or rather, he couldn't hear her, and the quality of that silence told him she was awake. Alert. Watching the street, watching the alleys, watching the way a person watches when they've learned that the moment you stop watching is the moment something finds you. An hour passed, maybe more, then her voice came through the open window. Low. Controlled. Why? Not a question with a rising inflection. A demand for an honest answer, stated flat, because she'd had enough of answers that came with performance attached. He kept working. Because someone had to. That is not a reason, a pause. That is what you tell yourself when you don't have one. The hammer stopped. He looked at the iron in his hand, at the firelight, at the wall between him and the truth she'd just articulated, with more precision than he'd managed in 12 years. "You're right," he said. "I don't have a better one tonight." The silence came back. Different this time. Still not comfortable, but differently uncomfortable. Like a room that's been rearranged. Same furniture.
New arrangement.
He kept working. She kept watching the street. Neither of them slept much that night. But neither of them left, either. And sometimes that's the only thing 2 people can offer each other at the start. Just, "I am still here, I haven't moved." Whatever that means, morning came in sideways, the way desert mornings do, not gradually, all at once, like someone lifted a shade. Wade brought out water and dried meat, set them by the door, didn't knock, didn't explain. She ate without looking at him, without thanking him, not because she was rude. He understood this immediately and instinctively, but because she was still deciding, still calculating. Gratitude carries weight. It implies a relationship. She was not yet willing to imply a relationship. He respected that, actually respected it, went back inside and started the fire again. Mid-morning, she moved around the side of the forge to where she could see both the main street and the eastern alley. Better sightlines. She'd assessed the building and improved her position. He noticed this through the side window and said nothing. She asked about the burn on his neck, not directly. She glanced at it. He caught the glance, and he saw in her face something he couldn't name yet. Not recognition, something earlier than recognition. The beginning of a question she wasn't ready to ask. Like she was trying to fit a piece into a puzzle that she hadn't expected to encounter. Old, he said. Because he'd seen the glance, she looked away. But whatever she'd been trying to fit into the puzzle, she hadn't stopped trying. He could see it in the slight tension at the corner of her eye, the way she filed it away for later. He didn't ask what she was thinking. That would come. Or it wouldn't. Either way, it was hers. Mid-afternoon, she asked where she could go, not plaintively, not desperately, practically. The way a person asks what tools are available for a job that needs doing. Wade thought about it, genuinely thought. Went through the towns he knew within a 3-day ride. Socorro, Hillsboro, Silver City. Each of them crossed territory in one way or another. The man had been running this region for 6 years, since the regiment disbanded, building his network through legitimate-looking trade that nobody in the territorial government had the interest or the evidence to challenge. "I don't have a good answer right now," he said finally. She looked at him with an expression that said, "I was not expecting a good answer. I was expecting you to pretend you had one. The fact that you didn't earns you something." "I'm not sure what yet. I'll think on it," he said. She nodded once. Went back to watching the street. That was the last calm moment of the day. The smell hit him at dusk. Not the clean smoke from his forge. Not the dust and mesquite smell of the desert cooling toward night. Something wrong. Something fat and greasy and purposeful. He stepped out the side door. The barn was a wall of orange. It went up fast, the way old wood goes up when someone has encouraged it. No gradual building, no smoldering start. Someone had prepared this. The hay was already consumed. The walls were already structural flame. And from inside the horses, he ran. Because you run. Because there's nothing else to do in the first 3 seconds of a fire, except run toward it and hope you're wrong about how bad it already is. He got the side door open. The heat was physical, not metaphorical. Actually physical, a force that pushed back against him, like a wall that didn't want to be passed. He went through it anyway, got to the stall on the left. His mare. She was terrified, and she bit his arm when he grabbed her halter. But she came. They came out together in a stumble of heat and smoke and hooves on burning straw. He went back in. He didn't make it to the second stall. The ceiling came down in the middle, not all at once. A cascading surrender. Rat, beam by beam, and the heat became something he could not argue with anymore. He came back out, without the second horse, with smoke in his lungs and the particular feeling in his chest that a man gets when he has failed to prevent something and has to stand in the evidence of it. The street was not empty. People had come out of the saloon, out of doorways, to watch. Nobody was bringing water. The watching was the point. The fire was entertainment or caution or a message being sent and received by everyone who understood the language Ashbone Creek operated in. The barn burned down to black bones. Wade stood in the ash. The heat still kicked at his boots. He didn't move then. Footsteps. Beside him, not running, just arriving. She stood at his shoulder and looked at the ruin without speaking for a moment. Then, Croft, not a question. A statement. "The man who burned my village," she paused. Not for effect. Because she was being precise. "The man you once wore the same uniform with." The silence between them was enormous. Larger than the burnt-out barn. Larger than the space between them. It had weight. Density. The quality of something that had been growing in the dark for a long time and had just been introduced to light. "How do you know that name?" he said. "Because I was there." Her voice was level, not loud, not theatrical. "Just true. When he burned us, I was there. I was 24 years old and I was there." Wade looked at the black skeleton of what had been his barn, at the place where his second horse had been, at the ash. "Not tonight," he said. She turned to look at him directly. "You do not get to. You're right," he said. "I don't get to decide when that conversation happens." "You're right." He met her eyes. "But Croft's men are watching the eastern road. We have one horse between us and a 6-hour window before full dark, so tonight we ride." "Tomorrow." He stopped, tried again. Tomorrow I will answer every question you have. All of them. Honestly, she held his gaze for a long time. People did not look at Wade Callum directly, as a rule. They looked near him, around him. At the general area of him, she looked at him, at the actual man. Like she was trying to find something specific, and wasn't sure yet whether it was there. All of them, she said. Not a question, a condition, all of them. She looked at the road, at the remaining horse in the corral, his mare still shaking slightly from the fire, but standing, at the darkening sky. Then we ride, she said. She told him her name when they were 2 miles out of Ashbone Creek, riding double on the mare because there was no other option, and practicality outranked pride. Saya, she said it simply, as a fact. Not an invitation. Just, this is the word that locates me, Wade, he said. She said nothing to this, but he noticed that she didn't shift away from him when the trail narrowed and the mare moved into a tighter gait. She held her position, balanced, efficient, not trusting, that wasn't the word for it, but not actively hostile to proximity either. A person making use of available resources. Behind them, Ashbone Creek was already small, already receding into the geography, like something that had been a temporary interruption rather than a fixed point. The desert opened ahead of them. Vast, indifferent, lit at its far edge by the last red smear of the sun going down. She was carrying nothing, no bag, no supplies, but she hadn't asked him to slow for anything. He'd brought his rifle, a cartridge box, dried meat, water, the coat off his back. Whatever they had was what they had. 2 miles out, she said. Turn north at the next fork. He'd been planning to take the East Fork. The East Fork was faster, more traveled, had a water source at the 8-mile mark. The East Fork was also exactly the route that Croft's men would expect. He turned north at the fork. They rode in silence for a while. The desert cooled fast once the sun dropped. That ruthless cooling of arid places that give nothing back once they're done with the heat. The sky went from red to deep purple to a black so thick and crowded with stars that it felt pressurized. She was watching the ridgeline, both sides, alternating, regular as a clock. He realized she'd been doing it since they left town. Every 30 seconds or so. A habit so ingrained it wasn't even conscious. You know this country, he said. I know the shape of country, she said. This particular stretch. No. I know how to learn it fast. How long have you been? He stopped. Tried to find the right word and couldn't because there wasn't one. How long since Sierra Oscura? She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. 3 years, she said. I was taken in the fall of 1871. Sold to a rancher near Socorro. Left his property in the spring of 1872. Found again in the summer. Brought to Ashbone Creek in March. The flatness with which she said this. The absolute refusal to perform the pain of it for him. It was one of the most dignified things he'd ever witnessed. And one of the most devastating, I'm sorry, he said. That word, she said, is one your people use when they do not know what else to do. I understand that. But I am not sure what you are asking me to do with it. He thought about this. Nothing, he said finally. I'm not asking you to do anything with it. It needed to be said. Another silence. It did not change anything, she said. No, but, she paused. It was said without performance. That is rarer than you might think. He took that and held it, said nothing, because some things you just hold, in the moonlight, riding out of Ashbone Creek behind them. She saw it clearly for the first time, not the glance from across a forge. The full shape of it. The burn scar on his neck. The way it ran from collar to jaw, pale and specific. She had seen that scar before. Not on this man's face, in a memory she had carried since she was 24 years old. A soldier who had come through the flames carrying a child, who had set the child at the edge of the trees and turned back, who had been stopped by something she couldn't see from where she'd been standing. The question she'd been forming since that morning at the forge became something else entirely. Not, who is this man, but, which man is he? She said nothing. Filed it beside the other things she was not yet ready to ask. They made camp in a narrow canyon whose walls still held the day's heat like a stored memory. Good shelter, protected from wind, sight lines on both approach directions. Her choice. He hadn't said a word. She'd angled the mare toward it, with the confidence of someone who had already calculated the options, and arrived at a conclusion. He gathered wood. She found a piece of scrap metal. He hadn't even noticed it in her hand, hadn't seen when she'd taken it, and began sharpening it against a flat stone. Systematic. Patient. She would have a blade by morning. He built the fire. Small, low, controlled. Enough for warmth, not enough to paint their position on the canyon wall. She was across the fire from him. Not far. 5 feet, maybe 6. In the firelight, her face was still and expressionless, but her hands were busy. The sharpening had a rhythm. Deliberate. It was, he realized, the same rhythm as the hammer. Something you do when your mind needs to be somewhere specific, and the body needs to be occupied so it doesn't interfere. He understood that completely. The iron, she said without looking up. You were going to use this for something. A hinge. The tack room door had been sticking. This is more useful, he couldn't argue. He didn't try. The fire cracked. An ember lifted and drifted and went dark. He should eat something. He should try to sleep, or at least approximate sleep, because tomorrow was going to require him to function. He did neither. He sat with his hands around his knees and looked at the coals and let the weight of the day settle through him, like sediment, dropping through water. The barn was gone. His second horse was gone. The iron stock he'd paid for was still on the supply wagon in Ashbone Creek. Elias Croft was still breathing, and sitting across a fire from Wade Callum. In a desert canyon that neither of them had planned to be in, was a woman who had said she wouldn't obey him, and had meant it completely, and whom he had no framework for, and no instructions about, and no idea what came next. He'd done the wrong thing today. He'd done the right thing today. Both were true, and they were not. He had learned this the hard way. They were not mutually exclusive. The child I carried out of the fire, he said. He hadn't said I had. It arrived. She went still. The sharpening stopped, not dropped. Carefully stopped. She did not look up immediately. There was a child, he said. I carried her to the tree line during the Sierra Oscura operation. I carried her out, and I put her down at the edge of the trees, and I went back in too. He stopped. Started again. I don't know if she survived. The fire made sounds that filled the silence. Good sounds for silence filling. Indifferent. Neither helping nor judging. Saya looked up. She looked at him the way she'd looked at the burn scar in the moonlight. That same quality of trying to fit a piece into a configuration she hadn't expected. Measuring. Precise. I was 24, he said, when Sierra Oscura happened. I thought, he exhaled, tried to find the sentence. I thought following orders and being right were the same thing. I was young enough that I didn't know better, and old enough that I should have. She held his gaze for a long time. You were 26, she said quietly. He blinked. What? You said 24, but if you were a sergeant in 1871, at the rank you held, you were at least 26. She paused. I noticed details. I always have, he almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because she was completely right, and it was such a specific kind of right that it knocked the self-pity sideways. 26, he said. You're right. I was 26. Then you were not a boy who did not know. Her voice was not cruel. It was the opposite of cruel. It was careful. Honest in the specific way that a scalpel is honest. You were a man who knew and chose not to act on what he knew. He didn't deny it. Yes, there is a difference between being young and being ignorant, and a difference between being ignorant and being afraid. I was afraid, he said. Croft had a pistol. He stopped. That's not. It doesn't matter what Croft had. I made choices. I signed things. I rode away the next morning. Yes, she said, one word. Witnessed, seen. The fire burned down slightly. He added a piece of wood. The flame reconsidered and rose again. I have been at that forge for 9 years, he said. Since the regiment disbanded. Since I changed my name, I told myself every day at the hammer that I was sorry, that I was different now, that the work was a kind of, he stopped. Penance, she said. Penance, he confirmed. And that if I was sorry enough, and if I worked hard enough, and if I kept quiet and kept my head down and didn't bother anyone with what I knew about what Croft was still doing, he stopped, 'cause he heard himself. And hearing himself, finally said out loud at 2 in the morning in a canyon in New Mexico territory. He understood how that sentence was supposed to end, that I could stay out of it, he said, that it wasn't my responsibility anymore. And yet Saya said, here we are, here they were. She went back to sharpening the blade. The sound came back, steady, rhythmic. He sat with what he'd said and let it be what it was. No more hammer work to hide inside. No anvil to pound the truth back into something manageable. Just the desert and the fire. And the woman across from him, who had told him he wouldn't regret buying her freedom, and had turned out to be exactly right. My mother used to say, Saya said, after a while, that the desert always tells you what you need to hear. Not what you want to hear, she paused. Most people come to the desert and hear nothing because they are already talking. I'm done talking, he said. I know, she said. I could tell. He looked at her. The firelight moved across her face, the still face. The eyes that didn't quit. How? Because you are the first man who has spoken to me in 3 years, whose words had the specific weight of someone trying to get something off their chest rather than into my ear. She looked at the blade in her hands. That is rare. Rarer than mercy, even. Honesty is more frightening. He sat with that. She kept sharpening. The desert went on in every direction, enormous and old and completely unconcerned with the two of them. The stars didn't move. The canyon walls held the heat. The mare snuffled at something in the darkness and was quiet again. Neither of them slept for a long time. But neither of them left, and that, Wade thought, somewhere around midnight, somewhere between the dying fire and the first cold breath of desert morning. That might be the most honest thing about this whole day. Not the $2, not the words, just the fact of remaining. You could stay. It turned out, even when staying was complicated, even when staying cost you something, even when you didn't know yet what staying meant, you could stay. He'd forgotten that, somewhere in 9 years of hammering. She'd never had the luxury of forgetting. He added another piece of wood to the fire. She kept sharpening. The desert kept its counsel, as it always had and always would, long after both of them were gone. Just before dawn, she spoke again. Just this, the child. Oh, that you carried out. He looked up. Tell me what she looked like. So he did, as carefully as he could, as honestly as he could manage at that hour, in that cold with the fire almost out and the sky just beginning to show gray at its eastern edge. The small face. The way she'd looked at him, not with fear, not with trust, but with the same careful precision he was now. 12 years later, on the receiving end of from across a different fire. When he finished, Saya said nothing for a while. Then she said, that could be described as a beginning. A beginning of what? She stood, tucked the blade into her belt, looked toward the pale strip of sky that was becoming slowly, and with some apparent reluctance, morning. I don't know yet, she said, but it is not nothing. He stood too. His back ached, his shoulder from yesterday's exertion. His hands, it's not nothing. He agreed. The mare shifted in the early light, impatient. The desert was waking up around them. A bird somewhere. A dry wind starting its work, the smell of cold stone warming. 2 people. 1 horse, 1 direction, roughly north, with everything else still unresolved, not nothing. It would have to be enough. For now, it would have to be enough. Day 3. The salt flats came without warning. One moment there was scrub and red dirt and the particular boredom of desert travel. Then the ground turned white, blindingly, mercilessly, almost accusatorially white. Like the land had decided to hold up a mirror and say, look at everything. Wade squinted, pulled his hat lower, kept writing. Saya did not squint. She rode into the white like she belonged there. Like the glare was simply information she was choosing not to be bothered by. She had that quality about her. The capacity to receive difficult things without flinching. Not because she didn't feel them. He had stopped believing that early. But because she had, somewhere in 3 years of being dragged through other people's worst decisions, built something between herself and the world that was not a wall. Walls kept things out. This was different. More like a filter she let things through. She just decided what they meant before they could decide for her. He watched her sometimes, when she was looking elsewhere. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. He wasn't sure he was ready to know. She taught him things without announcing she was teaching him. That was how it worked. She didn't say, "Listen, I will now instruct you." She just did something, and if he was paying attention, he was paying more attention than he'd paid to anything in 9 years. He could learn it. Water. First, the salt flats looked dead. Looked like nothing had ever lived there, and nothing intended to start. But she dismounted at a certain spot and crouched and pressed her palm flat to the ground. Moved it 6 inches. Pressed again. Then she looked up at him with the expression she used when she was waiting for him to catch up. He dismounted. Crouched beside her. "Color changes," she said. And she was right. 1.5 feet to the left, the white surface had a barely visible gray tinge. Almost below the gray, moisture. 6 inches down, maybe 8. How do you know it's water and not just, "Because I know." She paused. "And because I'm going to dig and show you." She dug with the blade she'd made the first night, 8 inches. The dirt at the bottom was damp. Not dripping, not a river. But damp enough, she said. "If you know how to find it." He looked at the barely gray surface. At the white all around it that looked identical. "I'd have ridden right over it," he said. "I know. For how many miles?" "Long enough that you would have been making poor decisions by the time you stopped." She stood. Wiped the blade on her skirt. People make poor decisions when they're thirsty. They make worse ones when they're thirsty and believe they aren't. He stood too. "Is that about water?" She looked at him sideways. "It is completely about water." She was not smiling. But there was something in the corner of her eye, a kind of dry wit that didn't announce itself, didn't perform, just existed, briefly, and then moved on. He found himself slightly unbalanced by it. In a way he hadn't been unbalanced by anything in quite some time. He didn't examine that he dug the water hole wider, and they let the mare drink. Once, near the end of the second day, he noticed her crouch beside a dry wash and pull something from the brush. A length of straight wood. She ran her thumb along it, testing the grain. Kept it without explanation. He was learning not to ask about things she was already handling. That night she asked about the forge, not the way people asked about his work in town. With the false interest of people making conversation, filling silence, being polite. She asked the way she did everything, directly, with genuine intent. "What does iron become?" she said. "When you work it right." "Anything," he said. "Whatever you need it to be. But you can't just bend it." She was looking at the fire. "It has to be the right temperature, the right moment." "The right moment matters most," he said. "Too cold and it won't move. Too hot, and it loses its grain. There's a window. You learn to read the color. What color? Orange first, then yellow. Then there's a white, not bright white, a warm white. That's when it's right. When it'll do what you ask of it without breaking." She was quiet for a moment. "My mother worked that way," she said. "He waited, with plants, with healing." She said, "The right pressure, the right moment. Too much and you kill what you're trying to fix." She paused. She could look at a person and know what they needed before they said it. What plant, what amount, what timing. A long breath. I was still learning when she was taken. He looked at the fire, at the small, careful architecture of it, the way she'd arranged the wood without him noticing, with the particular skill of someone who knew how to make heat last without waste. "You were a healer too." he said. I was her daughter. She was quiet a moment. That was all I was. Before he heard what was underneath that, the before and after of it, the clean division of a life by someone else's violence. He had a before and after too. His ran in a different direction. Both of them were living in the aftermath of something that had started in the same place and had cost them entirely different things. She would have kept teaching you, he said. Yes, just that. Then, she will teach me more when I find her, not if. When he looked at her then, at the certainty of it, not bravado, something simpler, the way you say the sun will come up. Not hoping, just knowing. He wanted to say something. He wasn't sure what. Something about how that kind of certainty, the kind that lives in the body, not just the head, was the rarest thing he'd encountered in almost 60 years on this earth. He said nothing, but he felt it. Which was, he supposed, a start. Voss Kiel found their second water point on the morning of day 4. Wade saw the dust first. Too deliberate, too straight. Not a desert wind's work. Someone making a line toward something they already knew was there. 4, Saya said, beside him, without him having said a word. I count the same. The one on the left is hanging back. He's the one we don't see until it's too late. Wade looked at the left ridge. Nothing. Dust shimmer. Rock, I don't see him. No. That's the point. She was already moving. The canyon. North. Now he moved. They moved. One horse between two people who were suddenly in absolute agreement about the direction. The canyon was narrow. Single file for riders. Which meant single file for Kiel's men. Which meant the advantage was not numbers anymore. Saya unslung her bow somewhere between the salt flat and the canyon mouth. He hadn't seen her acquire arrows either, but she had 6 of them. The straight wood from the dry wash. And others gathered along the way, which meant that while he'd been driving the horse and watching the horizon, she'd been quietly building herself a weapon out of available materials. At this point, he had stopped being surprised. He had started being impressed. He was trying not to show it because she would find it irrelevant and also slightly condescending. They got into the canyon. Found a bend, stone walls on both sides. No way to flank them without making noise. They waited. They were good at waiting by now. The two of them had developed it as a shared competency over 3 days of riding and sleeping in shifts and speaking only when necessary. The silence between them had changed from the first night. First night's silence was the silence of 2 strangers forced into proximity. This silence was calibrated. Each of them knew roughly where the other was at all times without having to check. The way you develop awareness of furniture in a room you've lived in long enough. The first rider came around the bend, and Saya's arrow was in his shoulder before he'd cleared the rock. Clean. Precise. Shoulder joint. He'd live. He'd also be pulling that arm close for 4 weeks at minimum and not riding fast for 2. She had already knocked the second. The second rider got an arrow in the upper thigh before he processed that the first man had gone down. He wasn't going to bleed out. He was going to be very unhappy for a long time. The third rider was smarter. He pulled back before he came around the bend, which left him behind cover but also without a way forward. Then Voss Kiel's voice, from somewhere Wade couldn't quite locate. Callum. Wade had his rifle up. Kiel. Man just wants his property back. Man doesn't own property that can talk back, Wade said. That's not property. That's a person. A pause. You always were the one with the philosophy, weren't you? Rest of the regiment was just trying to get through the day. How'd that work out for the regiment? Another pause. Longer. Then the sound of horses. Repositioning. Not retreating. Not exactly, but not advancing either. Kiel was a professional. Professionals calculated. And Kiel had 2 men down. And a canyon full of someone who could put an arrow exactly where she intended. And a blacksmith who apparently still had enough of his military accuracy to make the third position untenable. The calculation was not working in Kiel's favor. But Kiel was also patient, and patience in the desert was its own kind of weapon. Wade lowered his rifle slightly. kept it ready, kept his eyes moving. Then, from the left, he hadn't seen the fourth man either. The shot came from above the canyon rim, not aimed at Saya, at Wade. Because Keel was professional. And professionals identified the center of gravity and applied pressure there. The bullet went through the top of Wade's left shoulder, not the heart of the muscle, not the bone, but through the meat of it in a way that sent a specific and comprehensive message about the limitations of the human body under stress. He did not fall down. He wanted to fall down. His shoulder had strong opinions about falling down. His shoulder was writing a very urgent letter to the rest of him about the merits of the ground. He stayed standing. Because Saya was 12 feet away and still had 4 arrows and 3 viable targets, and she needed him vertical. He fired twice at the rim, heard scrambling. The fourth man pulling back. Keel from cover. Next time, then the sound of horses going. Not sprinting. Methodically. Unhurriedly. Like a man who had decided to change his approach rather than his objective. Wade let out a breath that had apparently been waiting a while. His shoulder disagreed with all of it. How bad? Saya was beside him. Just there. He hadn't heard her move. Fine, he said. She looked at his shoulder, at the blood darkening his shirt from collar to mid-chest, at his hand, which was... He noticed this at the same moment she did, trembling slightly on the rifle stock. That is not what I asked, she said. It's through and through, he said. Missed the bone. I can still. Sit down, I don't need to. Sit, she said it the way someone says a word when they have exactly no interest in debating it. Flat. Final. He sat down against the canyon wall. She was already working. She had the blade out. She cut away the shoulder of his shirt with a matter-of-factness that suggested she had made exactly this assessment before. Not guides. Not hoping. Reading. Exit wound. Entry wound. The channel between them. She pressed 2 fingers at the rim of the entry, and he did not make a sound, but he did close his eyes for a moment and concentrate very hard on the canyon wall. Then she was doing something with her hands. A sound of crushing. A green smell, not pleasant, exactly, but clean in the specific way of living things. Cactus. She'd gathered some along the canyon wall without him noticing. Of course she had. The paste went into the wound. Cold at first, then burning. Then, not nothing, his shoulder continued to have objections, but contained. She wrapped it with a strip of cloth from her skirt. Tight, precise. The same rhythm as the blade sharpening. The same rhythm as everything she did. You've done this before, he said. For others. She tied the last knot. Not often for men like you, men like me. She sat back on her heels, looked at him directly, men who knew better, and chose comfort instead. He looked at his wrapped shoulder, at her hands, which were steady and slightly stained green from the cactus, at the canyon wall behind her that was already going orange in the afternoon light. That's fair. Yes, she said. It is, she stood. Assessed the horses. Assessed the ridge where the fourth man had been. Assessed the direction Keel's retreat had taken. Doing her calculations, running her numbers. He sat against the wall and tried not to let his shoulder win the argument it was currently making. That night the fever started. It was a logical development. He'd been shot, the wound had been treated in a canyon with improvised materials, and his body was 58 years old, and had been riding double across salt flats for 3 days, and was therefore in a position to make reasonable objections. The fever was a reasonable objection. Saya kept camp small. She built the fire lower than usual. She sat across from him, with the blade across her knees, and watched him the way she watched the ridgeline. Regular, methodical, every 30 seconds. He told her this was unnecessary. She did not dignify this with a response. I'm not going to. He started. You don't know what you're going to do, she said. That's the problem with fever. It makes decisions for you. I've had worse, I believe you. Sit still. He sat still. He lasted. He estimated. About 2 hours before the fever made its agenda known, it started as it always did. The edges of things losing their sharpness. the fire becoming slightly larger than it was. The canyon walls moving in ways canyon walls were not traditionally known to move. His shoulder, which had been making arguments, became suddenly and strangely silent, which was worse. He talked. He knew he was talking. That was the specific cruelty of this kind of fever. He was still sufficiently conscious to know what was happening, and not sufficiently in control to stop it. He talked about the forge, about the horse he hadn't gotten out, about the iron stock still sitting on the supply wagon in Ashbone Creek. Then, somewhere in the early hours, he talked about the morning after Sierra Oscura. Not the fire. She knew about the fire. He hadn't told her about the morning after, the tent, the folding table, the paper on it, the neat columns of names, Apache names, transliterated into English letters that didn't fit them, names compressed and anglicized by a clerk who had probably never met any of the people he was writing down, and below the names, destinations, Socorro, Santa Fe, various ranching operations, various private parties, and at the bottom, a line for the signature of the ranking field officer on scene. Croft had already signed, big, confident, the signature of a man who saw no need to be careful. The pen was in Wade's hand. He didn't remember picking it up. Dispersal authorization, the paper said, of captured persons. Captured persons, he signed. He didn't sign because he agreed. He signed because Croft was standing behind him. Because the pistol was in Croft's hand, visible at the edge of Wade's vision, not raised, not pointed, but there, waiting, with the particular patience of a weapon in the hand of a man who has never been told no. He signed because he was afraid. And then he went to get coffee. That was the part he'd never said to anyone. The part that lived in him like a stone in a boot, 12 years of every step. Not that he'd signed. Not even that he'd been afraid. The coffee. The ordinary, cowardly, stomach-turning act of going to get coffee afterward, like it was a regular morning. He said this out loud, in the canyon, in the dark, with the fever taking the wheel. He didn't know he'd said it until he heard the silence that followed, not the regular silence of the desert. A different quality, a listening silence, the silence of someone receiving something. He tried to focus. The fire was doing things fires weren't supposed to do. Saya was there, across from him, still, the blade still across her knees. I signed, he said, or thought he said, and wasn't sure if his mouth was working properly. I signed the paper, and then I got coffee, the fire, the canyon. The dark I know, she said, very quietly. And then he was gone, properly gone, down into the particular dark of a fever that had made its decision. He woke to gray light, full morning, almost. The fire was out, not burned down, fed and banked and deliberately let cool, which meant she'd been tending it through the night, and had stopped tending it when the temperature climbed enough that he wouldn't need it. Details, he was aware of details, which meant the fever was behind him. His shoulder informed him that it very much had not forgotten the previous day. His shoulder was being extremely communicative about this. He told his shoulder to wait its turn. He turned his head. Saya was sitting 4 feet away, not across the fire, closer than she'd been. The blade was across her knees. She was looking at the eastern canyon wall where the light was starting to find the rock and show its color. She knew he was awake. She'd known before he moved. She had always known. You heard, he said. I heard. Then why am I still alive? She was quiet for long enough that he genuinely wasn't sure an answer was coming. Because, she said finally, I spent 3 years being reduced to a number in a ledger. I am not going to reduce you to the worst thing you have ever done. She paused. Even if it deserves it. He lay there, the rock under him, the sky above going from gray to pale blue. His shoulder, his 58-year-old everything. That's a more generous position than I deserve, he said. Yes, she said. It is. I am aware. She turned to look at him. Direct, as always. I also need someone who knows territorial roads to Silver City. And your shoulder is going to be usable in 4 days if I keep treating it. So there is a practical dimension, he almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so exactly her. The honesty, the logic, the refusal to dress anything up in sentiment it hadn't earned. Fair enough, he said. There is something else, she said. He waited. You said you signed the paper. You said you went to get coffee. She held his gaze. You did not say what happened before you signed. He was quiet. There was a pistol, she said. Not a question. Behind you. He didn't answer. Which was its own answer. I thought so, she said. The men in the trading camps used to talk. About that morning. About who signed what. About who held what. She looked back at the canyon wall. You were not the only one who had a pistol behind him. He sat up slowly. His shoulder accepted this with theatrical displeasure. It doesn't matter, he said. I still signed, yes. You did, she stood. But a man who signed only because he wanted to would not have spent 9 years at a forge, trying to beat his way back to something worth being. She looked down at him. You are not simple, Wade Callum. That is both your problem and the only thing that makes this situation. Anything other than a waste of my time. She went to check on the mayor, as though she hadn't just handed him something he was going to be sitting with for a very long time. He sat with it right then. In the canyon. In the morning light, he didn't know what to do with it, so he just held it. That was all he could manage. For now, that was enough. The ruins of the old post appeared on day 6, late afternoon, coming over a rise, and there it was below them. Adobe walls, mostly fallen, some sections still standing to shoulder height. A flagpole iron, rusted but upright. The pennant long since gone. The regimental insignia plate at the base of the pole, still attached, still legible. Wade stopped the horse. Saya looked at him, then at the ruins, then back at him with an expression that said, I see what this is. I will not perform anything about it. He dismounted without explaining, walked down to the pole, his boots on the rocky ground, the dust, the particular dead air quality of a place that used to be full of people and isn't anymore. He put his hand on the iron ring at the base of the pole. He had made this ring. 32 years old, before the regiment came through, he'd been in a different town and forged hardware for a supply run, and this ring had been in that order. He hadn't known where it was going. He'd found out later. The iron was cold, obviously. But there was something, the way metal holds a memory of work, the texture of where the hammer had touched it. He stood there. Saya walked up beside him, stood at his shoulder, not touching, just present, looking at the insignia plate. Men who wore that mark, she said quietly. Yes, a long silence. I was posted here for a time, he said. Before the operation, before Croft moved us south, I thought. He looked at the fallen walls, the broken barracks, the hearth, open to the sky. I thought this was something. What we were building here, you were building a wall between us and something you had already decided to take, she said. No anger in it. Just the shape of the truth. Yes, he looked at the ring. I know that now. Knowing it now cost you nothing, she said. The people who paid for what you learned are gone. He didn't argue. He couldn't. She was right, and she was always going to be right about this, and there was no path through, except the one that went straight into the middle of it. Then let me do something useful with what I know, he said. She was quiet, looking at him. The long, assessing look that he was beginning to understand was not coldness. It was accuracy. She was being accurate about him, measuring the distance between what he said and what he was. That, she said, finally and slowly, is the first honest thing you have said. That did not sound like a man asking to be let off a charge he knows he cannot beat. He looked at her. Previous honest things, she clarified, sounded like confessions. This one sounds like a decision, he nodded once. Took his hand off the iron ring. Then let's move, he said. They moved. The trading post was half a mile off the northern trail. Saya found it. Of course she did. Redfield Supply. The sign was barely there. Letters faded to suggestion by 10 years of sun and wind. The building was wood and adobe and a fundamental commitment to not quite collapsing. Door hanging off one hinge. Sand drifted to knee-height inside. But it was shelter, it was walls. And after 6 days of canyon camps and salt-flat bivouacs, walls felt like a negotiated luxury. He built a fire in the broken hearth. She moved through the space with her eyes, checking every corner, every surface, every place a person could have left something, or hidden something, or been. He watched her from the corner of his eye. She stopped at a chest in the back left corner. Wooden, old, padlocked. Except the padlock's hasp had pulled free from the rotted wood of the lid on one side. She could lift that side without a key. She did. He watched her reach in, pull out something wrapped in oilcloth, set it on the floor, begin to unwrap it, and then she went completely still. Not the listening still she used in canyons. Not the waiting still of someone assessing. A different kind. The kind that happens when the body stops, because the mind has stopped, because something has arrived that the mind had not prepared a response for. He was across the room, in 4 steps, crouching beside her. The bracelet was silver, tarnished but silver. Small, made for a woman's wrist, or a girl's, or perhaps both in different times of life. Carved with a pattern he didn't recognize immediately, but which Saya clearly did, because her hands, her steady, always steady hands, were shaking. A sun, carved in relief around the whole circumference. Not decorative. Intentional, my mother's, she said. The words came out of her without her seeming to choose them. Just there. True. She never takes it off, Saya said. Not for water, not for work, not for... She stopped. Her hands closed around the bracelet, held it. She was here. Nahia was here. This trading post is on the mission route north, which means she went north, which means she stopped again. She was not crying. He would not have been surprised if she cried. He wouldn't have known what to do with it. He wasn't a man who had been useful in the presence of other people's tears. But he wouldn't have been surprised. She didn't cry. She held the bracelet and sat in the silence of the information it contained, and let it move through her like water through stone, absorbing it, taking it in. He stayed where he was, close, not touching. After a while, she opened her hands and looked at the bracelet, put it on her wrist. It fit. Of course it fit. She had her mother's wrist. She's alive, Saya said. Probably. Not probably. She looked at him. Something had shifted in her face. Something had loosened very slightly in the region of her jaw. The perpetual vigilance there had changed quality. Not gone, it would never be entirely gone. But shifted. She is alive. She left this here, which means she was trying to leave a marker. She knew the route. She was conscious and thinking. She was choosing. She looked at the bracelet again. She is alive. Yes, he said. Not probably. Yes. Because this woman had decided. And he had learned that when Saya decided something, the universe adjusted its position accordingly. That night, the fire in the hearth, the wind through the boards, the bracelet on her wrist, they ate the last of the dried meat. He had enough for 2 more days if they rationed. The mission route north would take them through country he knew well enough to find supplementary provisions. There were trading outposts that weren't Croft-affiliated. A few homesteaders who would trade for labor. He was calculating all this when she said, "Forgiveness," she said, just the word. Sitting alone in the air between them. The concept of it, he looked up. "Your people treat it as a gift," she said. "Something the wounded person gives to the person who wounded them. A transaction, a ceremony." She turned the bracelet slowly on her wrist. 1 moment. 1 act. Done. Is that wrong? It is incomplete. She watched the fire. With us, forgiveness is not given. It grows back. Like grass after fire, a pause. No one gives grass to the earth. The earth decides when it is ready. And sometimes the earth is scorched too deep and the grass does not come back in that generation. The children's children inherit the burned ground, and they decide whether to tend it. She looked at him. This is not cruelty. This is accuracy. Some wounds take generations to resolve. Pretending otherwise is not mercy. It is impatience dressed as virtue. He thought about this. Genuinely thought about it. The way you think about something you've never had this particular angle on before. Then what do I do? he said, while the earth decides. You do not wait, she said. Waiting is passive. You tend what you can reach. You change what is still changeable. You do not ask the burned ground to rush its timeline to make you more comfortable. She paused, and you do not confuse the earth's silence for rejection. He looked at the fire. At 12 years of hammer strikes, compressed into one sentence by a woman, sitting in a ruined trading post with her mother's bracelet on her wrist. I've been waiting, he said. 9 years at the forge. Waiting for I don't know what, for it to feel like enough. Nothing you do will feel like enough, she said. That is not pessimism. That is the arithmetic of large wrongs. But the doing is still required. The not enoughness does not excuse the stopping. He sat with this for a long time. The wind moved through the boards. The fire made its sounds. Your mother taught you this, he said. My mother taught me everything. She looked at the bracelet. She had better odds of finding us with a marker she left behind than hoping we'd be told the right route. She has always known how to communicate through limited means. The faintest thing, in the corner of her eye. Not quite a smile. Something older and warmer than a smile. She is the most resourceful person I have ever known. I come by it honestly, I believe that, he said. She looked at him with slight surprise, like she'd expected something different. What? He said. You said that like you meant it. I did mean it. She looked back at the fire. But something in her posture had changed, very slightly. The angle of her shoulders, the set of her jaw. Something that was not quite relaxed. She was never quite relaxed. He didn't think she had the mechanism for it, and he respected that, but was different from the taut watchfulness that had characterized the first days. The shape of ease from a distance. Maybe that was the most that could be asked of either of them right now. He would take it. Voskiel came back on the morning of day 8. Not with 3 men this time. With 6, Saya saw the dust from the ridge above the trading post before dawn. Long before. She woke Wade with one touch to his boot. He was on his feet in the time it took to breathe in. And she was already at the side window. Watching 6, she said. He went back for more. He's taking this personally now. Keel doesn't take things personally, Wade said. He was pulling his boots on. His shoulder disagreed with the position. He overruled it. He takes contracts personally. Croft must have offered something additional. Then Croft is worried, she said. Croft is always 3 steps ahead. Maybe, she said. She turned from the window. But he didn't predict the bracelet. He didn't predict we'd find the route. She met his eyes. He planned for you to be stopped by guilt. That was his primary calculation, that you would stop yourself as you have been stopping yourself for 12 years. She picked up her bow. That calculation is incorrect now. He looked at her. She was right, he'd stopped stopping himself. He wasn't sure exactly when. Somewhere in the canyon, maybe. Or the salt flats. Or across a fire in this ruined building. He couldn't locate the exact moment. Only the fact of it. There's a back way out, he said. Through the collapsed section of the south wall. Tight, but the horse will make it if we go slow. How do you know? I came through this post in 1868. The south wall was already going then. He checked the rifle. If we move in the next 4 minutes? We're out before they've circled. She was already moving. They were out in 3. They didn't engage. Not this time. This time they ran, not from fear, from calculation. 6 men with rifles against 1 rifle and a bow and a shoulder that needed 4 more days of recovery was not a fight. It was a statement of failure, and they were too close to the mission route to fail. The mare ran like she knew. Like she'd been listening to the conversations and had opinions about the outcome. She ran through the narrow draw south of the trading post, through the mesquite flats, up and over a limestone ridge that Keel's heavier-laden horses would take twice as long to manage. 3 miles out, Saya said. Slower, he brought the mare to a walk. They'll track us, he said. To where? She was watching the terrain ahead. We're 2 days from the Gila. Once we cross, we're in territory. Keel doesn't know the way I know it. She paused. He'll follow to the river and lose the trail in the crossings. I know where to cross. How many crossings do you know? Enough. She looked back once, dust, far behind, following but losing ground. He's good, she said. But he learned tracking from soldiers. Soldiers track on known routes. They assume movement follows the logic of supply lines and established roads. She looked forward again. I move differently. He thought about the water in the white flats, the back route at the first fork, the position in the canyon. Every choice she'd made in 8 days, each of them correct, each of them invisible to him until she made them. Yes, he said. You do. She didn't react to this. She was switching the landscape, running her perpetual calculations. But he saw her fingers, just for a moment, touch the bracelet on her wrist, like a compass. Like a fixed point in a moving world, they rode north, the 9th morning. The land had been changing since they crossed the Gila. Slower, subtler than the Salt Flats drama, but definite. The red rock giving way to something greener. Not lush, this was still high desert, but alive in a different register. Juniper on the ridgelines, the smell of the air shifting. Cooler. Carrying something that was not quite the smell of water, but was adjacent to the conditions that produce water. His shoulder was better. The shoulder had opinions, fewer than yesterday. She had treated it every morning and every night without commenting on the progress and without commenting on what it cost her to provide care to a man whose signature had contributed to her mother's disappearance. He had thought about this. He did not know how to say what he thought about it. He let the not saying live between them and hoped it read correctly. She pointed to the rise ahead. Past that, she said. 2 miles past the ridge, there's a tributary of the Gila. Small, running east to west. The mission would be built close to water. She looked at the ridge. We'll see it from the top. He looked at the ridge. At the 2 miles between here and the answer to 3 years of her particular kind of searching. When we get there, he said. She looked at him. When we get there, your mother, when you find her, I'll give her the ledger copy. She should have it. Both of you should have whatever documentation exists. He paused. And then I'll take the original to Silver City. To the territorial marshal. Another pause. Whatever time that takes. After, I'll come back through this region. She was quiet. That's not a request, he said. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just saying what I intend to do. She looked at the ridge for a moment. You are telling me, she said slowly, that you intend to still be someone worth knowing. After this is finished, he thought about this. Yes, he said. I suppose I am. She looked at him for one long moment. The assessing look. The measuring look. And then, for the first time in 9 days, she nodded. Not the curt single nod of agreement. Something different. The nod of someone making a note. Of someone updating the calculation. He turned the mare toward the ridge. They rode up into the late morning sun. The land spread behind them. The salt flats, the canyon, the ruined post, the river crossing. 8 days of desert and difficult truths in one bracelet, left like a message in a locked chest by a woman who had bet on her daughter's arrival. 2 miles to the ridge, 2 miles to whatever came next. The mare climbed. And Wade Callum, who had signed a paper and gone to get coffee and spent 9 years at a forge in penance for both, kept riding toward the thing he'd been running. From long enough that running had started to feel like standing still. Time to find out what moving actually meant. The ridge waited. The other side waited. Everything waited. The ridge gave them everything. From the top, the land fell away north in long, slow folds. Juniper and pinon on the slopes. A tributary creek catching the morning light 2 miles down. Silver thread through the green. And there, tucked against the base of a limestone outcrop where the water bent east, a cluster of adobe walls. Small. One leaning tower. A garden plot on the south side. Saya went still in the saddle. Not her reading the landscape still. Not her cataloging threats still. Something else. The particular stillness of a person who has been moving towards something for 3 years and has just seen it. He didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say, because some moments don't need commentary, because he'd learned, 9 days in, somewhere between the salt flats and the fever, that the most useful thing he could offer her was the dignity of her own silence. She looked at the mission for a long time. Then, 2 miles. 2 miles, he confirmed. She nudged the mare forward. He went with her. They came down off the ridge in the long morning light. The creek smell reached them first. That specific coolness that running water carries even in high desert. Then juniper. Then faintly, something green and growing. A garden. Someone tending it. The mission was exactly as modest as it appeared from the ridge. Walls of mud brick. Some sections cracked and patched with newer mud in a different color. Years of small repairs layered on each other like the growth rings of a tree. The chapel door was heavy wood, sun-bleached to gray. The tower leaned west, not dangerously, but definitely, as though it had been meaning to straighten up and kept getting distracted. On the south side, the garden. And in the garden, a woman. She was crouching between rows of something low and gray-green. Her hair was silver-white. Not the silver of Adalone, but the silver of a person whose hair had always been inclined toward that particular light. She moved through the plants with the unhurried precision of someone who had been doing this work for years and expected to do it for years more. Her hands knew where to go, her back was to them. Saya had stopped the mare 20 yards out. She was not moving. He looked at her. Her face had done something he hadn't seen it do before. All the architecture of control, the set jaw, the still eyes, the careful arrangement of expression that kept everything directed where she pointed it, was trembling, just at the edges, the way a very taut string trembles when something passes close to it, not breaking, but feeling the possibility of breaking, acknowledging it. That was new. The woman in the garden turned her head at some sound only she heard, or perhaps no sound, perhaps something else. She straightened slowly, one hand going to her lower back, the particular movement of a woman past 50 who has been crouching too long. She turned, her left eye was clouded. The right one was sharp, precise. The eye of a woman who had learned to do the work of 2 with 1. That eye found Saya. The world stopped doing things for a moment. The mare stood still. The creek kept moving, because water doesn't pause for anything, but everything else, the garden, the mission walls, the high desert morning, held itself. The woman's hands rose to her mouth. Saya, 1 word. The name. Said in a voice that had apparently been saving that specific sound for 3 years. Wrapping it carefully, keeping it ready in case this moment arrived. It arrived. Saya was off the mare before he'd registered she was moving. Both feet on the ground, walking, then not walking. Crossing the 20 yards between them in the unstable gait of a person whose body has outpaced their composure. Her mother's arms came up. Not frantically, steadily. Opened like something that had always been open, had just been waiting for something to come back into them. Saya walked into them, and Nahia held her, and the sound that came from Saya, just one, not a word, not a name, just sound. The specific sound of 3 years of careful control finding the one safe place to set itself down. Wade turned away. He walked to the far side of the mission courtyard and sat on the low wall there and looked at the mountains. The Mogollon Rim in the middle distance, the way the rock changed color as the light shifted across it. Red to orange to the pale, almost pink of high-elevation stone. His shoulder ached, his eyes stung. He didn't examine why. Padre Alcantara found him there 20 minutes later, small man. 70 if he was a day. Though he moved like a man who had struck a private deal with his age and was getting favorable terms. Spanish by his accent. Not the New Mexico Spanish of the territory, but the older, more formal Spanish of somewhere further south, further west. Sonora, maybe. He had the sun-worn face of a man who had spent decades outdoors doing practical things, and the eyes of a man who had spent the same decades paying close attention to what people did when they thought no one was watching. He sat down on the wall beside Wade without asking permission, set his hands on his knees, looked at the mountains. You brought her, he said. Statement, not question. She brought herself, Wade said. I just shared a horse. Padre Alcantara considered this. The bracelet. We found it in the Redfield chest 6 months ago, when some traders came through. Nahia asked me to lock it there. He paused. She said, if my daughter is alive, she will be looking for me. And if she is looking for me, she will look in the supply lines. And if she looks in the supply lines, she will check every unlocked chest because that is what I taught her to do. He looked at Wade. She was not wrong. No, Wade said. She was not. The Padre was quiet for a moment. Nahia has been here 2 years. The missionaries who brought her through gave her to us because she was sick, and they didn't want to deal with a sick woman. We dealt with it, he said this without drama, as though dealing with things was simply what a person did. Her eye was already going by the time she arrived. It is fully gone now. The other one sees everything it needs to. The girl found her through the bracelet, Wade said. The woman, the Padre corrected mildly. The woman, Wade agreed. Yes. Alcantara looked at him, at his shoulder, at the state of his coat, which had been through 9 days of desert and 1 bullet and did not look its best. You're the one who bought her freedom, the Padre said. Wade looked at the mountains. $2, he said. The Padre was quiet a moment, then with great care. That is either the most expensive $2 you ever spent, or both, Wade said. Simultaneously, Alcantara nodded, as though this was a completely satisfactory and expected answer. There is food inside, and a cot in the west room that nobody is currently using. He stood, brushed his knees. The shoulder. Nahia can look at it. If you'll let her. She is the best healer I have ever encountered. And I say this as someone who has encountered quite a few. He paused. She learned from her mother, who learned from her mother. There is a depth of knowledge there that your medical colleges have not yet thought to ask about. He walked back inside. Wade sat on the wall. The mountains. The light. The sound from the other side of the building, that was not words but was something. The specific sound of 2 people talking in low voices in a language he didn't understand. Exchanging things that had been in storage for 3 years. He sat there until the sun had moved a meaningful distance across the sky. Then he went inside and let Nahia look at the shoulder. Her hands were extraordinary. He'd understood, intellectually, from everything Sayed said. He hadn't understood it in his body until those hands were on his shoulder. They moved through the wound assessment the way water moves, finding the path of least resistance to the information they needed. Pressing, listening through the fingertips. She couldn't see what her hands were finding. She didn't need to. She said something. Saya translated from beside her. She says the first treatment was good. Whatever was used on the first night, it held infection back. Cactus pulp, Wade said. Your daughter did it. Another exchange. Nahia's expression did something. Specific. Warm, she says. She taught Saya that technique when Saya was 12 years old. She says she is glad it was useful. Wade looked at the care in Nahia's hands rewrapping the shoulder, the absolute economy of motion. Nothing wasted, nothing performative. Tell her, he said slowly. Tell her I was present at Sierra Oscura. Tell her what I was. What I did. He met Saya's eyes. She should know before she does anything for me. Saya held his gaze for a moment, then she turned and spoke to her mother. More than a translation, a full telling, from the sound of it. Alcantara, in the corner doing something at a shelf, went still and quiet. Nahia listened. Her hands didn't stop. She finished the bandaging while she listened, tying the last knot with the same precision she'd started with. Then she was quiet for a while. Then she said something. She says, Sayas, said, and her voice was not entirely steady, that she knows who you are. She has known since the traders described you when they came through 6 months ago. The blacksmith from Ashbone Creek. The scar on the neck. A pause. She says she also knows what you did the night of the fire. Before you signed anything. Before you rode away. She paused again. Longer. She says the story of the soldier who carried a child out has been traveling this route longer than she has. Every woman who passed through knew it, passed it forward, like directions. He stopped breathing for a moment. The child. He said. Saya spoke. Nahia answered. She survived, Saya said. Nahia met the family who has her. Near Chuska. She is 11 years old now. She does not remember your face. A pause. But Nahia does. The room was very quiet. Wade looked at his hands, at the scarred geography of them. At the table surface between his hands and Nahia's retreating ones, I went to get coffee, he said. To himself more than to anyone. Saya translated anyway. Nahia was quiet. Then she said something short. Just a few words. She says, Saya said, a man who could have walked away entirely but pulled one child out first is not a simple man. A simple man walks straight through. You stumbled. A pause. She says, stumbling is not innocence. But it is not nothing. He looked up at Nahia. She watched him, directly. Without flinching, he wanted to say something. He had no idea what. She said something else. Put her hand briefly on his, just for a second. Then withdrew it and stood and went to find her daughter. What did she say? He asked. Saya was watching the doorway her mother had gone through, she said. Now do better. He slept for 14 hours. He woke to the smell of something cooking and the sound of voices. 2 women's voices, moving between Chiricahua and English, and back again with the easy fluency of people who have more to say than any one language can hold. His shoulder still ached, but the fever quality was completely gone. His head was clear in the specific way of a head that has been through something and has come out the other side into ordinary, functional consciousness. He lay on Noman's and listened to the voices. He couldn't make out words, didn't try. Just the sound of them, the specific sound of people filling in time together, catching up on years of unlived mornings. His eyes stung again. He'd stopped examining it. Some things you just let happen and then you keep going. 3 days at the mission, then 4, then 5. He hadn't planned to stay 5 days. He'd planned, vaguely, in the way of plans that are really just directions laid over open terrain. To get to the mission, make sure Saya found what she'd come to find, transfer the ledger copy, and turn south toward Silver City. Instead, he fixed the bell frame. It needed fixing. The rope had worn through at the attachment point, and the bell itself was sitting slightly off true on a bracket that had lost 2 of its bolts to rust. He couldn't look at it without seeing the problem, and seeing the problem meant he needed to solve it. He found iron stock in a supply chest in the chapel, old, not the best grade, but workable. He borrowed tools from the mission's inadequate collection and supplemented with his own. He made new bolts, set the bell true, replaced the rope with a length of leather that would outlast rope by 15 years. Then the chapel door hinges, because they were embarrassing. The wood had swollen and contracted through too many seasons, and the hinges couldn't compensate anymore. New hinges, proper ones, set correctly. Then the south garden wall, which had a section that was going to fall in the next rain. He worked steadily, from early morning, the way he'd always worked, except that this time the hammer wasn't penance. It wasn't weight management. It wasn't the mechanical processing of guilt into something that could be carried. It was just work. Good work. The kind where you put something broken in front of you, and you make it not broken, and then you move on to the next thing. He'd forgotten what that felt like. He'd forgotten it so completely that when he recognized it on the second morning, standing back from the bell frame, and seeing that it was right, that it would hold, that the bell would ring true for years without anyone having to fix it again, his hands stopped for a moment, and he just stood there in the early sun and felt it. It was good. The work was good. Padre Alcantara found him standing there. "You have done in 2 days," the Padre said, "what I have been putting off for 3 years. You had other priorities." "I had other priorities," Alcantara agreed. "Also, I am 71 years old, and climbing that tower has become inadvisable. He looked at the bell frame. The bolt pattern is more elegant than it needed to be. Old habit, Wade said. Habits do not have to be escaped, the Padre said. Some of them just need to be redirected. He looked at Wade with the attention he'd been applying all along. You knew that already. You just forgot. Wade looked at the bell. Yes, he said. I forgot. Alcantara clapped him once on the arm, the good one, and went inside. Saya spent mornings with her mother. He saw them from the garden wall when he worked there. The two of them in the south section of the garden. Nahia moving between plants with the efficiency of long practice. Saya close behind, learning or relearning, asking questions that were sometimes answered with words and sometimes with demonstrations. Nahia holding up a leaf to the light, crushing something between her fingers and holding it out for Saya to smell. Filling in the years, working backward and forward at the same time. Once he heard Saya say a name he didn't know, and Nahia went still for just a moment, then answered. And Saya bowed her head to brother. Dakota. He knew enough from what she'd told him. He went back to his work and gave them that too. The fourth evening, Saya came to where he was working at the makeshift forge he'd set up in the courtyard. She sat on the low wall nearby. Didn't speak immediately. He kept working. He was almost done with the garden wall brackets. The iron was at the right temperature. He could feel it in the color. She told me more. Saya said. About after the raid. About the route they moved her on. He listened. Worked. She was taken to a ranching operation near Lordsburg. First, then north. She made it to this mission because two of the women being moved with her got sick, and the traders didn't want to deal with it, and left all three of them with Alcantara. She paused. He took them in. All three. He would. Wade said, he is a strange man, she said. Not critically. Observationally, he is a good one, Wade said. Sometimes those are the same. She watched the iron. She told me something else. He set the hammer down. Turned to look at her. About Croft, she said. What Alcantara told her, from the traders who came through. Keel went to the territorial marshal in Silver City 4 days ago, by what the traders said when they came through. He gave enough testimony for a warrant to be issued. Croft's legal standing in the territory is gone. Wade was quiet. He won't run, he said. No? Croft doesn't run. He's never had to. He'll pull back to wherever he's fortified and he'll wait. He looked at the iron. He'll wait for me to come to him. Because if I get to Silver City with the original ledger, everything he's built is finished. He paused. He wants to intercept the ledger before it reaches anyone who can use it. So he'll be at Devil's Rim, Saya said. He'll be at Devil's Rim. She nodded once. Processing? Then that is where we go, she said. He looked at her. At the bracelet on her wrist. At the woman who had been in a slave auction 14 days ago, and was now calmly planning the next tactical step. You don't have to, he said. I know, she said. That is why I am going. He thought about arguing. He thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. Your mother knows, Saya said. I told her this morning, she said. She stopped. Something moved in her face. She said, go. Finish what needs finishing. I will be here when you come back. And if, she said that too. Saya looked at the mountains. She said, the earth is patient. So am I. He picked up the hammer. He finished the back bracket. He told himself he was not going to be responsible for everything that happened from here on the basis of a complicated feeling he hadn't identified yet and wasn't going to identify tonight because they were leaving in the morning and there was work to do. And then the bracket ones. And the feeling was still there, unidentified. He was going to have to deal with it eventually. Not tonight. Devil's Rim was 2 days south. They took the mare, and a mule Alcantara lent them without being asked. He simply led it into the courtyard the morning they were leaving and tied it to the post and went back inside, which was, Wade thought, a very efficient form of generosity. No discussion, no conditions. Just, here is a thing you need. Nahia came out to say goodbye to Saya. He watched from across the courtyard. gave them the privacy of distance. But he saw Nahia take Saya's face in both hands. The precise gesture she'd used in the first moment of reunion, tracing the lines of her daughter, as though her fingertips were reading something they needed to memorize. And he saw Saya stand very still and let herself be read. Then Nahia said something, short, and she reached into her dress and withdrew something, a small carved piece. Not the bone sun token which he knew Saya carried. Something else. A thin strip of leather with markings pressed into it. Saya looked at it for a moment, then carefully put it in her shirt pocket, close to her chest. He didn't ask what it was. Some things were not his to ask. Devil's Rim Canyon Country, east of the Gila. The land took on a different character here, more severe, cliffs blackened by old fires, rock formations that cast long shadows at the wrong times of day. The kind of country that made you feel watched even when nothing was watching, which, at the moment, was a somewhat academic distinction. Because something was watching, Saya tracked it from 6 miles out, a rider pacing them at distance on the east ridge. Too careful to be coincidence. Too consistent to be a traveler taking the same route. "1," she said, scouting, telling Croft we're coming. She was watching the ridge without looking like she was watching it. He knows. He's been expecting us. So much for the element of surprise. We were never going to have surprise, she glanced at him. We have something better, which is, he expects you to be afraid of him. She looked back at the canyon ahead. You are not afraid of him anymore, he thought about this. She was right. He tried to locate the fear he'd carried for 12 years. That specific cold weight that had kept him at the forge. Kept him quiet, kept his head down and his mouth shut, and his signature on papers he should have thrown into the fire. He tried to find it. It wasn't gone, but it was smaller. It had been outpaced. No, he said, I'm not. Then we have surprise, she said. Of a different kind. They found a position on the western ridge above Devil's Rim in the blue hour before dark, below them, partly hidden by the canyon walls, light, firelight, pressing through the cracks of a substantial structure. Not a shack. A proper building, adobe and timber. And someone had invested. Saya was counting. Watching the movement of light, the number of distinct shadows, the intervals between perimeter checks. 4 men, she said, possibly 5. 1 at the east approach, 1 at the west. 2 inside with Croft, and the scout back by now. So 5. She lowered herself further behind the rock. The original ledger will be inside. Somewhere Croft can reach it fast if he needs to destroy it. His desk, Wade said. He's a creature of habit. Desk, left drawer, locked. He's used that system since the regiment. You know his habits. I served under him for 4 years. He paused. You learn a man's habits when he commands you. You have to. Anticipating his mood was survival. She looked at him briefly, understanding something she hadn't needed, spelled out. Then we go for the desk, she said. He looked at the building below, at the light. At the 5 men between here and a locked drawer. Here was the problem with not being afraid anymore. The fear had been useful in one sense. It had made him careful. Caution and fear felt similar from the inside. Now he had to be careful on purpose. Without the fear doing the work automatically, he could do that, he thought. He could probably do that. We take the 2 perimeter men first, Saya said, quietly. Then the approach. Then we knock, Wade said. She looked at him. Croft knows I'm here, he said. He's been waiting. If we go in through a window, we lose the advantage of his expectation. He'll be wrong-footed by exactly one thing, and that one thing is that I came to finish it. He paused. He never believed I would. She considered this. Walking in the front door, she said, while I go through the back. Exactly. That is either very intelligent or extremely stupid. Yes, I'm aware of the duality. She looked at the building, looked at the east approach. Looked at him. Do not get shot again, she said. I am running out of cactus. He almost smiled. Not quite. I'll do my best. Do better than your best, she said. Your best so far has left you with 1 functional shoulder. She moved, silent, down the left side of the ridge. He went down the right. The perimeter man on the western approach had the particular alert but bored posture of someone who had been told to expect trouble for 2 days and had begun to suspect it wasn't coming. He was watching the northern trail, not the ridge above him. Wade came from the ridge, one motion, the rifle butt. Not fatal. He was specifically not making things fatal tonight. He had decided this. It was a decision he was keeping, but sufficiently comprehensive that the man's opinion on the matter ceased to be relevant for a while. He dragged him behind the juniper, took his rifle, left him breathing. From the east side, no sound, which meant Saya's approach had been equally quiet, which meant she was already at the back. He straightened his coat, adjusted his hat. His shoulder informed him of its opinion about rifle butt work. He overruled it for the third time in as many days. He walked to the front door, knocked a pause. The sound of someone inside going still, then Croft's voice. Warm, almost amused. Well, come in, Wade. The interior was lit by 3 lamps and a fire in the hearth. Substantial furniture for a canyon outpost. Croft had never believed in roughing it unnecessarily. 2 men stood against the right wall, both armed, both watching Wade with the professional attention of men waiting for instruction. Croft sat behind a desk, a proper desk, oak, by the look of it, hauled in from somewhere at considerable expense. Because Croft did not sit behind inferior furniture. He looked older, 12 hairs older, which was logical, but different in another way. The confidence was the same, undiminished, but something underneath it had calcified, gone from confidence to certainty, and certainty in a man like Croft was different from confidence. Confidence left room for other people's reality. Certainty did not. He looked at Wade with something that was almost fondness. The fondness of a man for a predictable thing. 12 years, Croft said. I kept waiting for you to appear. Every time a new man came into town, I wondered if you'd sent him. He leaned back. But you always were a come-yourself man, weren't you? Can't delegate the things that bother you? He tilted his head. Sit down. I'll stand. Still stubborn. He almost smiled. Wait. This doesn't have to be dramatic. Give me the ledger copy. We close the books. You go back to your forge. Nobody has to know you were ever mixed up in. Everyone already knows, Wade said. Keel talked. A pause. The first real pause. The first crack in the warm and amused surface. Keel, Croft said, is a coward who... Keel is in Silver City. The warrant is issued. Wade looked at the desk. At the left drawer. You have nowhere left to run this to, Elias. It's done. The 2 men against the wall shifted. Small movement. Preparatory. Croft's hand moved toward the desk drawer, and then from the back of the room, from the shadow beside the hearth, Saya stepped out. Bow drawn. Arrow nocked. Point level. Absolute stillness in her drawing arm, and absolute stillness in Croft. He looked at her. Something happened in his face. A recognition. The specific recognition of a man looking at a consequence he'd created and never expected to see, standing in the same room as him. He recovered fast. Croft always recovered fast. It was one of the things that had made him dangerous and would make him dangerous until the moment it stopped being possible. Well, he said almost gently, the Apache girl. From Ashbone Creek. His eyes moved across her. Assessment. The same assessment he applied to everything he intended to use or discard. I heard you were smart. I see the reports were accurate. She said nothing. Put that down, he said. You're not going to. Don't. Wade said, don't what? Tell her what she's not going to do? She's going to stand there until her arm gives out, and then I'm going to... Tell her what her father did, Wade said. Croft stopped, because that was not the move he'd predicted. Don't, Wade said again. Whatever you're about to say about her family. Don't. Croft looked at him. At Saya. Back at him. Recalculating. The 2 men against the wall were very still. They were hired men. Professional. They were calculating the arrow and the rifle and the blocked exit, and the fact that the perimeter men were no longer responding, and doing the arithmetic that hired men do when a situation stops being a managed risk and starts being a potential ending. Croft saw them calculating. He picked up the revolver from the desk, not pointing it. "Just present, Wade," he said. "You always had the problem of feeling things. The other men, they could put the feeling in a box. You never could. You signed the paper, but you felt every name on it. I knew that. I always knew that." He paused. "That's why I kept you alive afterward. A man with that much guilt is the most reliable kind of quiet. He doesn't talk because talking would mean admitting he was there." He leaned forward. "So, talk now and admit you were there, and see how that works out for the new life you've apparently been building." Wade looked at the revolver, at Croft's hands on it, at the particular quality of stillness in a room that has run out of acceptable outcomes and is waiting for someone to offer an unacceptable one. "The ledger," Wade said. "Left drawer. Hand it over, or the woman with the bow decides she's been patient long enough." Croft's eyes moved to Saya, and Croft, who had never in 64 years made the mistake of underestimating a threat in front of him, looked at Saya and made that mistake because she was young, because she was Apache, because she was a woman, because in his specific architecture of the world, none of those things added up to danger he needed to fully respect. He smiled, the warm smile, the one that said, "I have the situation. I remember," he said to her, "from the camp. He called out to you. Before, the arrow point did not waver, but the rest of her, just for a second, 1 second, in that second, Croft moved for the drawer. The lamp on the desk went over, not Croft's doing, not Wade's. A man came in through the side door, one of the remaining hired men, not steady, moving fast, shouting something about riders on the south approach. He hit the doorframe, hit the desk. The lamp went sideways. Oil hit the floor. Fire the kind that doesn't negotiate. And in the chaos, shouting, the two wallmen going for the door, the fire taking the floorboards with a speed that said they'd been dry for 3 seasons. Wade was at the desk, left drawer, locked. He didn't have a key. He had a rifle butt. He used the rifle butt the drawer gave. The ledger was there. Original, thick. Every name in Croft's careful handwriting. He grabbed it. Turned. Croft was between him and the door, revolver up. Now. Actually up, not just present. Saya had moved, circling, looking for angle. But the fire was between her and a clear shot, and the smoke was already eye level and moving fast. Croft looked at the ledger in Wade's hand, at the fire, at the men who had already gone through the door, at the calculation. "You're not walking out of here with that," Croft said. "Elias. You never should have come back," Croft said. And the warmth was gone from his voice, finally completely gone. Just the thing underneath, the thing that had always been underneath. 12 years I gave you. You could have had 30 more. You gave me nothing," Wade said. "You took," a voice from the far corner. By the hearth, both of them turned. A man stood there, one of the hired men, not one Wade had accounted for. He'd been in the shadow. He was young, maybe 25. His face was doing something complicated, something that had nothing to do with the fire and everything to do with a folded paper in his left hand. Jed Pruitt. Wade knew the name from Ashbone Creek, but hadn't connected it to a face until now. "You told me," Pruitt said, and his voice was working around something, "that my wife died in the camp. At Sierra Oscura." He held up the paper. "This is from the ledger copy, the one the marshal in Silver City has. Her name is in it." He looked at Croft. "April of 1872. Sold to a ranching operation outside Mesilla. She didn't die. You sold her. The fire was at the walls now. The window glass cracked from the heat." Croft turned to look at Pruitt, and in the turn, for the first time in 12 years, for the first time perhaps in his life, Elias Croft looked like a man who had run the numbers and found that they did not work. "Pruitt," he said. The warm voice, "One more time, one last use of it. That is not." The shot was very loud in the burning room. Croft went backward into his desk. The desk gave. He hit the floor, and the burning floor met him, and the fire had its opinion about the whole situation. Pruitt stood with the gun still up, staring at what he'd done. what he'd had to do, what 3 years of a lie had brought him to. Then he turned and went out the door. Not running, walking. The walk of a man carrying something that is going to take a long time to put down. Wade grabbed Saya's arm. She didn't need grabbing. She was already moving, already heading for the door. Bow down, smoke smart, navigating the burning room with the efficiency of someone who had learned to move through bad conditions. But he grabbed her arm anyway, because the roof was making sounds and the sounds were wrong and he needed them out now. They hit the door. The air outside was cold. After the fire's logic, absurdly, beautifully cold. The desert night receiving them without judgment, they ran, not until they fell. Until the distance between them and the building felt like a number that made sense. Then they stopped, turned. The structure went up like it had always been going to, like the fire had been patient, like it had been waiting for exactly this. For the moment when all the things it had been asked to protect were finally finished being protected, and it could rest. Saya looked at it. At the fire consuming everything Croft had built in that canyon. The ledgers, there had been other ledgers, other records, all of it going, except the one in Wade's hands, the one that mattered. He's gone, Wade said. Yes, she was quiet a moment. Looking at the fire, it's not over. No, it's finished, she said. That is different. He looked at her. Over means done, she said. Finished means completed. What it was supposed to do. She turned away from the fire. North, take me home. 7 days back, slower than the coming. No one was chasing them. The urgency had changed direction, not away from something now toward something, toward the mission, the garden, Nahia. The specific and unmistakable pull of a destination you actually want to reach. The mare settled into a comfortable pace. The mule followed with the philosophical acceptance of mules. They talked more, not constantly, but more than before. The silences were still there. They would always be there. They had both been shaped by the kind of quiet that comes from surviving things alone. But the silences changed again. Were comfortable now in a way that the first canyon's silence hadn't been. She told him about tracking. Real tracking, the kind her mother had taught, the kind that read a landscape the way a healer reads a body. The small signs, the weight of a passing. What the bent grass says about direction, about urgency, about the size and state of what moved through. He told her about iron, the different grades, the way pig iron and wrought iron behaved differently under the same hammer. The specific satisfaction, there was no other word for it, of a piece of work that was exactly right. That would do its job for 20 years without anyone having to think about it again. She listened the way she'd listened in the trading post. Attentively, taking it apart to see how it worked. The bell frame, she said, on the third day back. You used better material than you had to. He thought about it. The minimum viable solution bothers me. Why? Because the thing it's supposed to hold deserves better than minimum viable. He paused. If you're going to do a thing, do it right. Otherwise, why do it at all? She was quiet for a moment. My mother says something like this, she said. About healing, she says, a half-treatment is a lie. The plant knows. The body knows. You cannot fool either of them by doing part of the work. No, he said. You can't. She looked at the terrain ahead. The greening country, the juniper and the smell of water. Dakota, she said. He waited. When I find him, after the mission, after I have more time with my mother, I will go east. The Pecos. The river towns, she paused. I don't know how long it will take. No. I don't know what I'll find when I get there. No, he said again. She looked at him. You are not going to say something encouraging, she observed. You didn't ask me to. A pause. Then very quietly, no, I didn't. They rode. The mission appeared on the fourth day, coming over the same ridge they'd come over the first time. The same grove of junipers. The same slant of afternoon light across the tower. The same garden on the south side. Same woman in the garden, silver hair, straight back. Working between the rows, Saya didn't wait, didn't slow. The mare knew and moved, and Saya was across the courtyard and into the garden before Wade had finished tying the mule to the post. He tied the mule to the post. He unsaddled the mare. He gave her water from the trough. He did all these things at a pace that kept his back to the garden. That evening, Padre Alcantara opened a bottle of something Spanish and old and poured it into whatever cups were available, which turned out to be very mismatched, which he appeared to find perfectly acceptable. The four of them sat in the chapel, because the evenings were getting cool, and the chapel held the day's warmth longest. Alcantara raised his cup, said something in Spanish. Wade got the general direction of it. Nahia said something in Chiricahua. Saya smiled at it. A real smile, all the way. No edge on it. Wade raised his cup. They drank. Alcantara looked at Wade across the rim of his cup. So, he said. Croft handled, Wade said. By you? Not exactly, he thought about Pruitt. About the paper in his hand. About what 3 years of a lie does to a person when the truth finally arrives. By the situation he created, these things tend to resolve that way, Alcantara said, without particular surprise. Men like Croft build systems. Systems have edges. People fall off those edges. And then they push back. Wade said, yes. With whatever they have, he looked at the cup. What happens now? With the ledger, Silver City, Territorial Marshal. I'll go in 2 days. He paused. It won't fix everything. It'll close some books. Open some investigations. Some of the people in those pages will be found. Some won't. And the ones who aren't found? Alcantara said. Naya said something. Saya translated, she says. The ones who aren't found are still somewhere. The earth knows where they are. The earth is patient. Saya held her mother's gaze for a moment. She says, we keep looking. The fire in the hearth. The cups. The mismatched, sufficient, entirely adequate cups. Keep looking, Alcantara agreed. Yes, the morning of the second day, he was in the courtyard before dawn. Habit. The sky still gray-dark. Stars going out one by one. He'd brought his tools out. There was a piece of iron in the supply chest that had been sitting unused. Good iron, better than the mission had any reason to expect. He'd been thinking about it since he'd seen it 3 days ago. He built a small fire in the courtyard. Not a forge fire, not the infrastructure for that. Just enough heat to work with. Improvised. It would do. He started working. He wasn't sure what he was making. That was fine. Sometimes you started and the iron told you. The hammer came down. Steady. The rhythm he'd always had, but different now. Not penance. Not weight management. Not the sound of a man trying to drown out the thing inside his own head. Just the hammer, the iron. The morning, he worked for an hour before he heard footsteps. Not Alcantara's careful shuffle. Not Nahia's precise, economical walk. The other one, Saya sat on the low wall. Close enough to see what he was doing. Far enough to indicate she was not interrupting. He kept working. After a while, she said, you work like you're praying, he thought about this. The hammer, the rhythm, the particular quality of attention that good work demanded, maybe, he said. To who? He paused. I'm not sure anyone's listening. She looked at the fire. My people pray to what is present, she said. The land, the water. What has existed longer than we have? A pause. There is something freeing in it. You do not need anyone to listen. You only need to mean it. He brought the hammer down. The iron moved. I mean it, he said. I know. Silence. The hammer. The fire. Then she said, what are you making? He looked at the iron. Looked at what it had become in the last hour. Something he hadn't planned. A bracket. Not a hammerhead. Not a hinge. A bracket. The kind that holds two things together that need to be held. That lets them move independently within a limited range without separating entirely. He held it up. It was good, not perfect. Good. Something useful, he said. I don't know exactly what for yet. She looked at it. You'll find out, she said. Things like that always find their use. He put it down on the anvil stone, looked at it for a moment. Then he reached into his coat, took out the ledger, the original, Croft's careful handwriting, every name, and set it on the wall, beside her. This should be yours, he said. You and your mother, before it goes to Silver City. Whatever you need to find in it, addresses, names, routes, take what you need. She looked at it. Didn't touch it immediately. Some of these names, she said, we will be able to find people. Some of them, yes. And some will be too far, or too long ago. Yes. She put her hand on the cover. Didn't open it yet, Dakota, she said. He'll be in there, Wade said. If Croft's system was as complete as I think it was, he'll be in there. A date. A destination. He paused. It's not much. It is more than nothing, she said, which is what I had before. She picked up the ledger. Held it. Thank you, she said. He looked at her, at the bracelet catching the early light, at the woman who had said she would not obey him, who had been precisely correct about that, who had not obeyed him once in the entire 12 days of their acquaintance. Sitting in the early morning light of a mission chapel courtyard, holding her mother's language in a dead man's handwriting. You found her, he said. I just shared the road. The road matters, she said. Who you share it with matters. She looked at him with the direct, assessing look that he had been on the receiving end of since the auction platform. Only it had changed, not less precise, but warmer. The temperature had shifted, very slightly. Enough to be different. You are not the man I expected when you paid $2. What did you expect? Guilt with a hat, she said. He laughed, actually laughed. Not the approximation of it, that he'd been producing for 9 years, but the real thing. Sudden, a little surprised at itself, almost immediately over. She watched this happen with an expression that was not quite a smile, and was closer to one than anything she had offered before. You are occasionally funny, she said. I had not predicted that. Neither had I, he said. Honestly, she stood, tucked the ledger under her arm, looked at the mountains beginning to show their color in the first real light. I will be leaving in a week, she said, after I have more time with my mother. After I've read this, she touched the ledger. East, Pecos River Country. I know, and you will go to Silver City. In 2 days, she looked at him, measuring. The final assay, after Silver City, she said. What? He thought about it. There's a town north of here called Cimarron. They've been without a blacksmith for 3 years. I know because Alcantara told me, unsolicited, which means someone put him up to it. He looked at the bracket on the anvil stone. I could set up there, Cimarron, she said. It's on the eastern route, he said. If a person were traveling to the Pecos River country. As a reference point, she looked at him for a long moment. It is on the eastern route, she confirmed. It is another long moment. That is not a coincidence, she said. No, he said. It is not. She looked at the mountains one more time. Then at him, at his shoulder, which had been getting better every day since Nahia took over the treatment. At his hands at the bracket on the stone. Then do not let the work slip, she said. In Cimarron. I will have opinions if the hinges are mediocre. Your opinions are consistently useful, he said. I'll keep that in mind. She walked inside. He stood in the courtyard in the first full light of morning. The mountains. The mission. The garden on the south side, where Nahia was probably already working. She was always already working. He picked up the bracket, turned it in his hands. A thing that held two separate things together while allowing them to move, that kept them from separating entirely out without requiring them to be the same thing. He had made this without knowing he was making it. He set it back down on the anvil stone, let it sit there. In the morning light, the last morning came the way last mornings do, ordinary, the same sun, the same quality of light. The world offering no particular ceremony. To mark the end of one thing and the beginning of something else, he had the mare saddled before breakfast. After breakfast, Nahia came to him in the courtyard, without Saya as translator. She stood in front of him and looked at him with her sharp eye for a long moment, the thorough look, the healer's look. Then she said something. In Chiricahua, he didn't understand it. He said so. She smiled. The same smile that lived in the corner of Sisha's eye, but had more practice on this face. Then she reached into her dress and produced something. A small strip of leather, different from the one she'd given Saya. Different markings. She held it out to him. He took it. She said something else. Touched his chest briefly over the heart. Then his hands. Then stepped back. He looked at the strip of leather. Saya appeared from the chapel door. What did she say? Wade asked. Saya crossed the courtyard. Looked at the leather. At her mother. Something passed between them. A look. A small shared understanding. She said, Saya translated, that a man who knows how to fix what is broken is rare. She said, most men know only how to make new things. They cannot see what is worth saving. She paused. She said, this is a marking from our clan. It means, the one who stayed to do the work. She looked at him. She says it is yours. You earned it by the standard she uses to give it. He looked at the leather strip. At the markings, what standard is that? He said. Saya's expression did the thing it had been doing increasingly often in the last 2 days. Not quite a smile. More than close to one, she says. He came when he didn't have to. He stayed when he could have left. He told the truth when lying would have cost him nothing. She paused. She says that is the entire standard. He closed his hand around the leather strip. Nahia patted his arm. Once. Matter of fact. The way she did everything, then she went back to her garden. Because the plants needed tending. Because the morning was advancing. Because the work did not pause for sentiment, and sentiment did not require the work to pause. He stood in the courtyard. He had to go. Silver City, the Marshal, the Ledger Brookard, all those names. He had to go. He went to the mare, checked the cinch, the saddlebags, the rifle, which he checked the way he'd always checked it, a habit from a version of self-pay, but hadn't entirely shed. Saya was at the gate. She handed him a canteen. He'd forgotten the canteen. Of course he'd forgotten the canteen. He didn't say this, and she didn't say it, but they both knew it, and the knowing of it sat between them like something warm. 2 days to Silver City. She said, 2 days. Cimarron is 4 days east of Silver City, I know. She looked at him. The direct look, the full look, then she reached into her pocket, brought out 2 silver coins. Tarnished, edges worn smooth. He recognized them. He did not ask where she had kept them. Some things you carry, without explaining. He understood that better than anyone. She held them out. He looked at them. He didn't take them. Say, payment, she said. You don't. I know I don't. Her voice was even. Certain. The way all her voices were. That is why it means something. I am not paying a debt. She met his eyes. I am choosing to give this. Those are different things. You know the difference. You work with metal. You understand what it means when something is made deliberately. He took the coins cold. Worn smooth. The weight of them, barely anything. $2. The price of a pair of worn boots. 1 night's drinking. Nothing remarkable. Everything. He closed his hand around them. I'll build something, he said, worth spending them on. She looked at him for one last moment. Long. Complete. The full accounting of everything she'd assessed over the last 12 days. The tally. Then find me when you do, she said. He nodded, turned the mare north. He rode. Behind him, on a flat stone in the mission courtyard, a bracket sat in the morning light. The kind that holds 2 separate things together. That lets them move without separating. That does its job for years without anyone having to think about it again. He had made it without knowing what it was for. Now he knew.